Okay, rolling.
Ready?
Yep.
Okay. What was your first recollection of meeting Steve? When, where, what were your first impressions?
I first encountered Steve, of course, when he was a freshman in cross country. And he was demonstrated right away that he was a very good runner, a very competitive runner. We had a pretty good cross country team that year with some good veterans, and he stayed right with them. When we got into competition, for a freshman, he was running he was our number 2 or 3 runner on the team, and then he was running pretty consistently in the top 10 or top 15 in our league, which at that time was really a very tough league, the Midwest League of Oregon.
Mm-hmm. You ever remember anything about him like challenging the upperclassmen, or was he cocky? Right off the bat,
Yeah.
you realize he's going to be. Is like, hey, this kid is got something special.
He was Steve was, as I said, a good runner. He was competitive. At that point, particularly his freshman and his sophomore years, he ran obviously well if you look at his times over that time frame. But he was not over assertive.
Mm-hmm.
The big change that happened with Steve was at the end of his sophomore year. He failed to qualify for the state meet in track and field. He had run really a good times that should have qualified him easily into the state meet out of the district, but he ran a very subpar 2 mile at the district meet and didn't make it to state. Our concern, Walt's and mine concern at that point, was how he was going to handle that disappointment, because it was a pretty devastating experience for him, because he's always was competitive. So the big change came after that when he returned to us in the fall of his junior year. He walked into the locker room and he looked at us and he said, "Coaches, I'm going to be the state champion in cross country." And honestly, we told him that was a great goal. But privately, back in the coach's room, we looked at each other and said, "This is going to be he's put a big challenge in front of him," because it wasn't like there was a whole set of new distance runners in the state. The opposite was true. There was 4 returning upperclassmen who one had already been a state meet champion, and 2 others particularly had run first and second at the state meet in track in the mile and the 2 mile. So, and then there was a kid even in our own district, Doug Crooks, which I'm sure his name will come up later, who was an outstanding runner. So there were good, very outstanding distance runners in Oregon at that time in high school. So he had established a goal there that was significant. The amazing thing was, within 2 weeks of the start of the cross-country season, we realized that this was not the Steve Prefontaine who had run for his freshman and sophomore year. This was Steve Prefontaine with a whole different, had gone to a whole new level in terms of running ability, in terms of workouts, and putting himself out there as trying to be the best.
Was he working out on his own lead into the season? I mean, coming into that, how?
Yeah.
I assume.
What we also learned too from him was that during the off season that summer, he had decided that it wasn't a thing that happened just before cross country started. It was actually a personal decision he had made to be the best runner he possibly could be right after the district meet. So that summer he had begun to work really hard on conditioning himself and strengthening himself and mentally preparing himself to be an outstanding runner.
Yeah, I went over this already.
Yeah, you can see the next one.
We'll go to the next one. Okay.
Yeah, that's
Well,
good.
but okay. What were we going to next?
Well, it's,
We're still on the same subject here.
Okay.
Yeah, we're just here. Here we go. Steve was eager to learn and take advice?
One of the things that made Steve a good runner was that he was quick to accept the training requirements that was put before him, and to carry them out as best he possibly could, to even often try to do more than what was asked of him or expected of him. Probably one of the best examples of that we really didn't realize until late in his senior year was one of the things that we initiated during that time frame was encouraging the runners, the distance runners, to get up early in the morning and on their own to do some morning running, 3 to 5 miles, just to loosen their bodies up and prepare them for the workouts. What we didn't realize Steve had taken from that and on his own was not only did he want to loosen up, but he also wanted to challenge himself every morning. So what he would do, just to show you how committed he was to improving, he would set a pace. Once he'd jogged a quarter mile, half mile from his house, he would set a pace that he felt was fairly tough, maybe like 80% capacity, which really wasn't what we were telling the kids to do, but it was just his own decision. And then he would run that as far as he could before he really felt, some level of fatigue or he was out of breath or it was hurting too much. And then he'd mentally mark in his mind because he ran the same loop every morning. He'd mentally mark what telephone pole, what house, what landmark he was right by when he had to slow down and run easier. And then the next day out, he would do whatever he had to do to extend that slow down points further down the course until he had carried that pace throughout the entire run until he was ready to start. He was within a half mile of his house and he'd slow down and jog the last part of the run. And once he reached that part, then he'd go back to that starting point again and increase the tempo. And again push himself to a breaking point or to a fatigue point and then mark it. And he constantly did that over the last 2 years of his running. Those were morning workouts that for most kids was a lot more than just going out and jogging. They had an intensity to them.
Mm-hmm. What were Steve's early goals?
Steve's earliest goals, I think, as a freshman and a sophomore, were just to find out what he was capable of doing. There was a program that timing athletes in the runners in what they were doing was paramount. So there was always a time out there for him to look at from workouts, obviously from the track stuff in the spring. And he was always trying to push his times to improve and to be competitive with the runners that were around him. The big difference after that was not only to push himself, but to be excel at whatever, and to begin to with his junior year, like I said, determining to be the state champion in cross country. Then, as we moved into the track season, to to establish some running times and goals that were far better than what the average runner, or even the good runners, were looking at in terms of success.